Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shelly, and today I am going to be doing a slightly unstructured review, unspoiled, I'm not going to spoil it, unspoiled review of The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. This book was published on May 2nd, 2023 by Grove Press and runs at about 724 pages. I found out about this book when I was doing my I did a video about the 22 books that we need to keep an eye out during springtime, according to the New York Times. So the New York Times put out a list. The Covenant of Water was on the list as books we need to look out for. And I hadn't heard of this author and I hadn't heard of this book. And very quickly I got a flood of comments, very kind comments, that Abraham Verghese had written a book called Cutting for Stone that was a wildly popular success. And so that is what put Covenant of Water on my radar. I have not read Cutting for Stone. And then, of course, Miss Oprah Winfrey, she came out with her book club choice, and it was Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. So these two things collided, me talking about the list, the comments, I guess 3 things, and Oprah's book club, and then that's what got me to pick it up. I read it with my friend Anita, and we had a lot of great conversations that came out of reading this book. So what is Cutting for Water? Mixing the titles, girl. What is Covenant of Water all about? So it is a multi-generational family saga that is set in India, in this rural area in India, this eventual town, but it's called the Parambil, and it starts off as this plot of land that is owned by one family. And this family seems to be cursed. Someone in their generation, 4 generations, has drowned. And in some cases, in very unusual ways. It's unusual drownings, not the typical. And so this family seems to be cursed by water. And in this family, the main character that we end up following is someone named Big Amachi, which Amachi, I believe, translates to something like mother. So she's a big mama. And she does have this motherly energy. So we follow her and her family through, living in the Parambil for generations, essentially. The other storyline that we're following is a Glasgowian Scottish doctor named Digby. And he arrives in India through a set of circumstances, and his storyline and Big Amachi's storyline with her family and neighbors and extended family and children, they do collide in many ways. And ultimately, of course, as any good author does, he brings the storylines together in a relatively satisfying way. So this book does a lot. It has commentary about education and poverty, sickness, and rural life. In some ways, I felt like Verghese was trying to make Parambil, the actual area itself, a character. There is a myriad of different characters. Oh, and it also touches on the caste system throughout. There are conversations about nature, farming, art, and writing. There's a lot going on in this book. And that actually brings me to my first critique. There's almost too much going on in this book. We could have cut down on 5 or 6 of the topics that Verghese is trying to touch on, and it could have been a much more streamlined read. In some ways, I wanted more about the caste system. I wanted more about the partition. It's like the partition was touched on just ever so slightly, and then moved on quite quickly. I wanted a bit more from the novel whenever it talked about these different things. I was like, the caste system is so fascinating, but I just wanted a bit more. So it's like he gave you a taste. The author gave you a taste of these really complex, interesting, fascinating topics, and often left me a little bit dissatisfied with how he ended up rolling the novel through. Or how do I say it? Rolling the novel through, Shelley. Jeez, it's like, doesn't make any sense. He left me dissatisfied with the amount of information he gave me about each complex topic that he brought into the novel. That's the way I wanted to say it. I've noticed that with multi-generational family sagas, there is often a part of the novel that just shines, that is so fascinating, that is so interesting, and it's in contrast, unfortunately, to the parts that are just dull, like that are a bit of a slog. And Covenant of Water definitely had that. The parts that just leapt off the page that I just could not put down when I was reading those parts that were so fascinating were the parts that were set in a hospital, were set in a medical environment that collided with medical school, the operating table, and the doctor's offices, surprisingly. Though not really surprisingly, because I found out that Verghese, the author, is a professor of medicine, that is his first career, teaching about, doctoring and, interacting with students. That is what his background is in. And it's not really a surprise that those parts were so wildly alive and gracious me, like absolutely fascinating. We go through parts where we meet lepers and get to know what it is like to have leprosy and to be in that experience. There are parts where there are skin diseases, and there are parts where we are, in labor and delivery, delivering babies. There are parts about in medical school, like one of our characters is in medical school and learning all about the human anatomy, and there are cadavers and dissections going on, and it was just riveting. I mean, riveting. You could not tear me away from those parts. So interesting. And then it was just in contrast with, mommy. The contrast was with the parts in the more rural areas of India. So as I mentioned, there's this setting, the Perambal, which starts off as acres, and you watch this area become more modern, more evolved, and in a lot of ways that was satisfying. And there were times I thought that Verghese was right at the edge of making Perambal and Perambal, which I don't know how it's said, and I'm sorry if I'm saying them interchangeably. But when Perambal, I think that's actually how you say it, feels like it is a character in the book. When the setting itself becomes a character, but I feel like the author didn't quite get it there. He didn't take it there. It didn't quite get its own characterization. Or if he did take it there, it didn't quite read as that. It didn't come off as that. It was not successful. And so the result was that there was this incredibly uneven reading experience. There would be moments.
We have gross stuff.
Okay, I'm sorry, baby. All the interruptions today. It's all right. There would be these moments where we would be in this rural setting, hanging out with Big Amachi and the family and the other quirky characters of the neighborhood, and it would kind of be a slog. My buddy reader Anita said it perfectly, but there were times where I felt trapped. She said it. She felt trapped by the book. And I was like, I felt trapped by the book. Like I'm in this 700-page book and I feel dedicated to finishing it. And I want to know what's happening in certain other parts of the book. But there are times where I'm just like, I just don't want to continue. I'm not drawn to picking it up. And I could just care less about some of these characters. And so, there was like this contrast in setting, one that leapt off the page and the other that was a bit of a slog. There was also characters that I just felt like I should have connected with. Like, this is one of the main characters of the book. Big Amachi was one of them. I wanted to be on her side. I wanted to root for her. And it took an incredibly long time to feel any kind of connection with her and with her struggle. And I didn't like that. I'm a character driven reader, and I wanted to feel drawn to the character right away. I have I guess the word, as I'm trying to wrap it up, the word that comes to mind about this book is that it was just quite an uneven reading experience. There were characters that I loved, that I thought were funny, that I connected with right away. Digby was one of them. Lennon was another. Digby is the Glasgowian doctor who I just immediately felt an affinity to. I wondered and I hypothesized whether Verghese was able to write Digby so well because Digby is a doctor and a young man, and that is, Verghese at one time was a young man, and he has this background in medicine, and so I wondered if there was this aliveness to Digby's character because of our author's background. Lennon is this cheeky troublemaker that I just absolutely adored, and then there were characters that I just felt sort of meh to their struggle. Like, I could have cared less as to their pain and what they were going through, which is, strange, because I felt like I should, that I should be connecting with these characters, and I just wasn't. So, there was also an unevenness when it came to the topics. Like, the caste system I thought was interesting, but it didn't get me in the feels. I wasn't like, oh man, that's so fascinating. So I didn't find the caste system super intriguing, although it was interesting. It wasn't what drew me back to the book. But then there were aspects of religion, because we were following this small group of Indian people who were St. Thomas Christians. And I found that background and that aspect really funny in parts. Like, he made the scenes very funny and very interesting, and also very lively. It had a lot of humor and life to it. So, it was just so uneven. And I would say that my verdict on this would be that I would have rather read a book about India, a book that was about the culture and that took you even through the same time period, 1900 to about 1970s, that was focused on explaining the caste system or showing you the effects of the caste system in a more engaging way, and that had characters that I absolutely loved and that I felt connected to throughout. Or a book about medicine. I'm imagining like the book that I'm going to be reading for the BookTube Prize, but I think it's Lindsay Fitzharris's The Butchering Art. I'm going to be reading the same author's book, The Facemaker, for the BookTube Prize. It's like I would rather have, or just a blend of both, but like the whole book set in a hospital. I just felt like it came up short, and for a 725 page book, which is quite a chunk of time, it wasn't worth it. It just wasn't worth it. So it was one of those things where I read it so you didn't have to. Again, it was such an odd experience, because some of the pieces were clearly written by somebody who had a lot of passion for it, but didn't quite get there in the end. But anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this review and found it helpful. I would be interested if you've read this or have recommendations for me about books set in India. It could be set in India, but just, about the medical system, or just the medical system. Like, let me know. Just give me your recommendations with books that are concerning those topics. I'd be really interested. And yeah, that's it for me. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye.